Welcome to the 2018 Candidates Forum, brought to you by the Wallingford Community Women. I'm Jean McFarland, the program moderator. This program features candidates running for the state representative in the 85th, 90th, and 103rd Assembly Districts. The format will be as follows. The first part of the program will consist of questions asked of the candidates by members of the local media, including the New Haven Register, Luther Turmel, and the Record Journal, Lauren Tacores, and a student from Mark T. Sheehan High School, Gretchen Sight. The concluding portion of this program will allow each candidate to make a closing statement. During the question and answer portion of the program, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidates will be allowed 1 minute for comment. To conclude the program, each candidate will have 3 minutes to make closing remarks. Before beginning the questioning, I'd like to introduce the candidates running for state representative. From my immediate left, in the 85th Assembly District, we have Donald Crouch, Republican, and Mary Mashinsky, Democrat. In the 90th District, we have Craig Fishbein, Republican, and Daniel Fontaine, Democrat. In the 103rd District, we have Liz Linehan, Democrat, and Diane Pagano, Republican. Luther Turmel of the New Haven Register, will you please ask your first question of Mr. Crouch?
Good evening, Mr. Crouch. What's your position on tolls being implemented on Connecticut's highways? And if you are opposed to it, how would you go about paying for upgrades to the roads and making improvements?
Sure, it's an easy question. Definitely vote no on tolls. And to follow up on that, I think transportation, we have enough money for transportation. We have to look at how we're wasting the money. We really have to have a transportation plan in place where we look at what we have and in the budget, and then actually go through and say, you know what, this is a good project, this is a good project, this isn't. And we have to look for any waste, fraud, and abuse in the department.
Mary?
We have two nonpartisan commissions that have both said the Transportation Fund will run a deficit 2 years from now. It'll be empty 4 years from now. So it's not realistic to say we can do nothing and the roads and bridges will be maintained. We will have to pick something, either higher gas taxes or tolls, which would at least get funding out of the 30% of travelers that are traveling through our state and paying nothing. You can structure them in such a way that out-of-state people pay more. You can give discounts for commuters, but you have to pick one or the other, either gas tax or tolls.
Craig?
Thank you. I'm opposed to the tolls for many reasons. First of all, it jeopardizes millions of dollars in federal funding that we already get. We get more federal dollars currently because we don't have tolls. Nobody has opined that we would not lose that federal funding. That's one reason. We spend about $2 billion a year on transportation presently. Unfortunately, while I've been in the legislature, there's been sweeps from the transportation fund to the general fund. The last one that I remember was $38 million. You know, there's enough money there. It's just the appropriation where that money is being spent. Certainly, you know, there's been an expansion of buses and trains and those kinds of things, and our roads and bridges have gone to waste to a certain level. So it's a matter of priorities here.
Daniel?
I'm also opposed to the tolls. I think, you know, we're in the richest state and the richest country in the history of the world. We have this kind of incredible tax inequity. We have some of the wealthiest folks here paying a fraction of the rate that working and middle class people pay. So why that reality persists, we shouldn't be putting a regressive tax on people just commuting back and forth to work. So I think the solution is rather to get a more fair tax system, bring money, make sure we stabilize the general fund so we no longer have to be sweeping money from the transportation fund into the general fund. I think that that's the primary direction we should be headed. I think, you know, absolutely the need for transportation funding is incredible, and I understand that we have a lot of out-of-state traffic that comes through. I mean, I drive through New York State and I pay tolls, but you know, I think, as I was saying, you know, we also are going to be hitting our own folks here, and while we have middle income and working class people that are struggling to make ends meet, are already you know, faced with the majority of the tax burden in the state, this is just going to be another tax.
Thank you. Liz?
Thank you. I'm opposed to anything which creates a larger tax burden on our residents. However, we don't have enough information to tell us if tolls would actually do that. This past year in the legislature, I was working with the proponent of the tolls bill to see what it would mean if we were able to reduce or eliminate the gas tax, reduce or eliminate the municipal car tax by providing more aid to municipalities. We looked at whether we could do a straight tax credit on our income tax, not only for individuals, but also small businesses with more than one truck. If the ultimate tax burden by doing those things would be less to our residents, then I'd be for it. But right now we don't have that information. And additionally, I'd like to say that there is a lot of misinformation. We will not lose federal funding if we do congestion tolling. I do have a letter from the Fed stating that. So if anyone would like to see that, I'd be happy to share that. Thank you.
Diane?
I am against the tolls, and just to make a comment about the congestive fees. What will happen with that is we will incur that, the working people will incur that, because it'll be timed. It'll be when we're commuting to work, going back and forth. Only 70% of those people driving through the state are 30% are out-of-state people. So we need to concentrate on what that transportation fund is and where we're allocating that money. That is one of the most important things, because we can't just throw that money wastefully away. We need to concentrate and look at where we're putting our funds.
Thank you. Gretchen Sight, would you please ask the next question of Mary Mashinsky?
Good evening. State universities in Connecticut are receiving less funding from the state, which is creating a rise in tuitions by about 5%. So what can you do to help students like me planning to enter college in the next few years?
Well, one thing we did was restore $50 million to UConn and the state university system that was going to be cut, which if it had stayed cut, that obviously would have affected your tuition, but we fixed that this year. We do believe that the state's strongest asset is its people with degrees. That is the reason why technology wants to settle here, and we would be unwise to hurt the number of degrees in the state. Another thing we're doing, and this bill didn't make it this year, but I will try again next year, is to do 2 years free school, either at the university system, so the first 2 years would be free, or at the community college system. That would give people a leg up. They wouldn't have to borrow as much, and they would get out of school with less debt, which would help them be successful in Connecticut.
Craig?
So, you know, there's an assumption that everyone should go to college. And I've learned through my personal experience that that's not necessarily the case. You know, I went to college right out of high school, and I screwed up really bad. I think I was there for 3 years, and I ended up with a semester's worth of credits. I had a lot of fun, but I wasn't ready. You know, then I went back, and I had to pay for it myself. It took about 10 years off. So, you know, college isn't for everyone. You know, I think college is very expensive. You know, when I talk to children that, or young people that are in law school now, you know, they're going to Quinnipiac, and it's close to $200,000 to get a degree out of there. It's very expensive. Some people talk about free college, but the fact of the matter is, who's going to pay for it? Actually, the people that aren't in college. And, you know, as far as getting breaks, I don't see any.
Thank you. Daniel?
I think we should be going the way that New York State and other states are going, which is tuition-free public college. I think, as I mentioned before, we have incredible wealth in this state. We have an incredible inequity in what people are paying as far as, both the corporate tax rate and the overall tax burden for some of our wealthiest people. So I think absolutely the money is in this state to provide tuition-free college, and I think it's absolutely essential for our future. I think the question isn't whether, the assumption isn't that everybody should go to college. I mean, obviously not everybody should go to college. Some people don't want to go to college. They would rather be in a technical school or follow some other path. The question is whether or not the people that have the ability to go to college and the talent have access to that, and it's actually critically important to our future to ensure that they do. I mean, we've seen, even if you go back 30, 40 years, we had a number of states that had completely free college or near tuition-free college. So I think the idea that we can't do things we did 30 or 40 years ago is absurd. So I think that's absolutely the direction we need to go.
Thank you. Liz?
Thank you. And Gretchen, thank you for that question. I'm so happy you're here. I love to see young people getting involved, so thank you. I'd like to talk about what we are doing. So myself, I'm a big believer in the community college system. And so what I've done is I made sure that we are utilizing business and industry know-how and using that in our community college systems and creating a curriculum that is teaching kids how to be prepared for the jobs that are available to them now. Case in point, manufacturing. And I put together the Student to Manufacturer Connection Fair at the state capitol for the past 2 years now. And I've invited high school students to come in and meet with manufacturers, and we've started programs where these manufacturers are actually paying for these kids' community college education, and they are being paid while they're there as an apprentice, and then they have a job offer as soon as they are out. So we need to start looking at also how we are marrying the two things, education along with business, so that we can make sure that we continue to have our greatest economic resource, our students. Thank you.
Diane?
Can you please repeat the question, because I think it kind of got lost along the line here.
Since colleges in Connecticut are receiving less funding every year, tuitions have been going up by about 5%. So what can you do to help students in the future with lower costs?
Thanks, Gretchen. So we need to look at administrative costs. We need to see what the administration is, I believe it's $800,000 for UConn that the president is getting paid. And correct me if I'm wrong. But I wouldn't begrudge her to receive it, but we have to look to see where we're putting those funds. We have to see how much people are getting paid. They are doing excellent work. They're getting our kids through college, but we need to see and look at those prices, look at the prices of college, and see where we're spending the money in administration.
Dawn?
State spending is at an all-time high, so if we offer free tuition, we have to cut somewhere else. It's a noble idea. I graduated from University of Connecticut, still paying off my student loans. So, I think we have to have adequate funding for education, but I don't think we can afford free education.
Okay. Lauren Torres, would you please ask the next question of Craig Fishbein?
All right, thank you very much. If Connecticut does indeed repeal the state income tax and becomes reliant on sales and property taxes for state revenue, would you support municipalities having the ability to levy an additional local sales tax?
I'm in support of municipalities having all of the tools that they deem to be necessary. When the Home Rule Act was passed in 1958, prior to that, anytime a municipality wanted to do something, it had to get permission from the state. With the Home Rule Act, it gave more power to the towns. But still, the state retains an awful lot of control over that. Towns can only levy the taxes that are approved by the state. So I'm totally in favor of a municipality making that decision based upon the tools that the state gave it. Because local politics, that's where we as voters have the most control. If your local town council in conjunction with your mayor determine that a local assessment, a local sales tax is appropriate, you can vote those people out of office locally. Whereas when a state mandates it, that it has to be charged, but a minority of the legislature makes that bill happen, then you don't have really voting power over whether or not that happens. So I'm a localized sort of person, and I would be in support of that as well as other things. You know, when you decrease taxes, there's automatically an increase in capital production. So businesses are more apt to be purchasing more equipment and making more jobs and all of that stuff also. So you're going to have naturally more money come to the towns also without a levy, but totally in favor of giving those tools to the municipalities. So thank you.
Daniel?
If we eliminate the state income tax, towns are going to have to do a lot more than add a new sales tax. I mean, our property taxes are going to go absolutely through the roof. I mean, there's studies saying it'll be anywhere from 40 to 50% increase in local property tax. And I think it's actually very telling that the Republicans have picked the income tax as the tax they'd like to eliminate. It's one of the few taxes in the state which is actually a progressive tax. For most of us, the major tax we pay is our property taxes. And so the idea that we're going to take the state income tax, one of the very few taxes that hit the wealthiest harder than us, and we're going to eliminate that and transfer that into local property taxes. I mean, it's a very transparent ploy of wealth transfer from the middle class to the wealthy, and I think it's absurd and it has to be stopped.
Liz?
Thank you. Let's think about for a minute what would happen if we gave municipalities the option. You wind up pitting municipality against municipality, and that's a dangerous game. I represent 3 towns, Cheshire, Southington, and Wallingford. Wallingford and Southington have a great downtown area with many businesses, and maybe they'd be able to bring in enough to cover that, but Cheshire does not. So what would happen? Businesses wouldn't want to come to Cheshire. Businesses wouldn't do well in Cheshire because we would have to raise it so high to keep up with surrounding towns. I think that it's a bad idea, and we need to think even more outside the box because this just wouldn't work. Thanks.
Diane?
I believe the municipality needs to take control and the state needs to not mandate anything.
Don?
Before we put in the income tax, we looked at it and said, hey, we need more money. And what happened? We put in the income tax, now we need more money. So we're always looking at how we're going to get more money. I really think if we take the income tax, get rid of it, or even reduce it, I'm all in favor of having the local towns have their property tax, or looking at other things, sales tax, different ways to bring in revenue. But right now, with the town just being able to do property, a property tax on your cars, it holds back on what a town can do.
Mary?
If you eliminate the income tax, that's $10 billion, it's 1/2 the budget. Since half the budget is already fixed by law or contract or judicial decision, that means the other half, which is the education funds and the public safety funds, would be entirely on the towns, entirely. And they would have to raise sales tax and property tax so high to make up that difference. It's hard for me to do the math here quickly, but it's $10 billion at 169 towns having to deal with this. The property tax is already unequal. There are losers among both residents and losers among towns. And we would simply exacerbate this by taking away something that's more or less equally distributed by income, and instead replacing it with something that is very unequal in its effects on retired people, poor people, people who can't afford to pay it.
Thank you. Luther, would you please ask the next question of Daniel Fontaine?
Dan, what should the legislature be doing to try and improve the state's economic and business climate?
I mean, I think the major issues are around making sure people are educated, well educated. We have a well educated workforce, that we have strong cities here. I think if you look across the country where economic growth is happening, it's overwhelmingly in large urban centers. We even see a number of our large corporations here preferring to move towards New York or Boston to pay, higher costs of doing business, higher taxes than stay in Connecticut. So I think overwhelmingly, when you look at the decisions businesses are making, it's overwhelming. It's, they want the best employees, they want well-educated employees, they want modern infrastructure, and they want to make sure that they have a state that's got a direction for the future. I think one of the major things that makes Connecticut much less appealing for business is the fact that the state can't seem to balance its budget. It's jumping from one strategy one year to another. And so I think if we have the revenue to stabilize our budget, to make sure that we are giving access to education at the same level that surrounding states are doing. We're investing in our cities, which is a major issue. I mean, we're situated between New York City and Boston, and those cities are becoming incredibly expensive, both to do business and to live. We should be well situated to have, Hartford, New Haven be attractive places. But because, a related issue that 50 to 55% of the downtown real estate in both New Haven and Hartford are controlled by tax-exempt institutions or collections of tax-exempt institutions. We have cities that are chronically underfunded, and we're not in a position to attract those businesses. So I think, ultimately what we need to do is we need to make the state a better place, better trained workforce, attractive cities. And I think, that's will be a major step, but the state's got a number of issues beyond that to look at.
Liz?
Thank you. Connecticut's best economic resource is our well-trained workforce. So I am a firm believer in working with businesses, like I said earlier, so that we can prepare people for the jobs that will be available to them. We know that businesses want to come here because of our well-trained workforce. Now we have to clean up the reasons why businesses haven't been coming here. I believe fixing our transportation system is going to be a very big reason why we can start to attract new businesses. We also have to continue to work towards being more friendly in our business climate. As a member of the Commerce Committee, we passed 10 business-friendly laws this year that really focused around small business and the ease of doing business. I think we also need to now go further with that and be able to look at how we can attract those businesses. And the best way to do that is to talk to these businesses and ask them what they need from us. And that also includes, like I said, the education. Thank you.
Diane?
We've watched GE and Alexion leave. I worked for Alexion. I saw a lot of my friends lose their jobs. We need to keep our businesses in Connecticut. We need to lower their taxes, their tax base. We want somebody like Gretchen to be able to she's a sophomore. We want to see her graduate, go to college, and come back to Connecticut and earn a great income. And we need to build up some of our cities like they have in West Hartford or Middletown, and we need to get these kids great jobs, and we need to help our businesses grow. Quick thing with tourism. We're in the middle of Boston and New York. We are not utilizing that at all. We need to sell our state.
Thank you. John, sorry, thank you.
I'll help you along. As a small business owner, we really have to eliminate the tax burdens on small businesses. I mean, even something as you would look at it and say a business entity tax. Well, we get taxed as a business just because we're in business. It's those type of policies that I think, and that's a small amount of money. It's not a big thing, but it's that type of policy that is not business friendly. I also think everybody talks about the minimum wage with businesses. We don't think about the consequences if we do raise it. I worked at Taco Bell when I was in high school, and I definitely shouldn't have gotten $15 an hour to pay for, to make tacos. So it's one of those things, we have to look at how that's going to affect the bottom line for a business, but we have to be a more business-friendly state.
Mary?
A whole bunch of things we can do and should be doing. I've spent the last 8 years working on apprenticeships, which are very successful, and the most successful program has a 94% placement rate of well-paying jobs in Connecticut. We have to use our educated workforce and plug them into the tech jobs, which are the best bet for this part of the country. We have to concentrate on STEM careers and STEM education. In the VOTEC system, the tech jobs have to match the industry in the region. So in our region, it would be medical technology, for example. The budget has to be stable enough to be predictable for businesses. We have to have transit that works to move workers and goods. We have to have interesting cities that are safe to live in. And another idea that's used in some states is to pre-approve sites and advertise them to corporations.
Craig?
So, one of the problems with our economic development in this state is, as others look from the outside in, stability. They look for stability. When a business wants to come and locate or start in a particular state, they look for stability. Connecticut does not have stability. You know, in 1 month, there's going to be drastic cuts to the municipalities, and the next month, it's not as bad, and the next month there's a surplus, and the next month there's a deficit. That's not stability. You know, one of the other things is using tax dollars to pick winners and losers. I've generally been opposed to that. You know, bribing businesses to stay in Connecticut, somebody's getting a benefit, but somebody's getting taxed more as a result of that. You know, utilizing our tax dollars to pick winners and losers just does not help economic development either.
Thank you. Gretchen, would you ask the next question of, oh, I'm sorry, did I miss Dan? No, you started. Okay, Liz Linehan, Gretchen, would you ask the next question of Liz?
State of Connecticut has pension obligations that are underfunded and in danger of not being able to pay its retirees in the future. What do you propose to do to remedy this situation?
So there are a few things that we need to do. First of all is we have to pay those bills. We've been kicking the can down the road for 70 years, and that's why our obligations are so high. So what we need to do is get a handle on the other side of the budget, aside from debt service, so that we can put more towards debt service. I think that's very, very important. Additionally, what we need to do is, let me just say, Connecticut has reduced its workforce by 9,000 workers over the past 10 years. So we're taking positive steps, but we're still needing to, those bills are going to come due. So what we need to do is get a handle on the budget by utilizing results-based accountability, which is something I've been advocating for the last 2 years. And what that does is it works backwards from intended outcomes so that we can cut money from the general fund out of the budget so that we're not, so that we are utilizing the intended outcomes like I stated, and we are also not paying for things that aren't working, right? That's how you trim the budget without hurting our most vulnerable. And so if we can get a handle on that, we can put more money towards debt service. Additionally, the CBAC agreement has helped us tremendously. That gave us $1.7 billion for this budget, and it helps smooth us out. And we now, there's no more pension spiking. We looked at reducing that. And a lot of people put time and money on the line for that. Some of these workers gave up 7 furlough days so that they weren't getting paid. So we need to look at more of that. But I'll tell you this, it only works when we work together. To go in and unilaterally change things is not the way that we do that, because it will hurt people. So what I'd like to do is see everybody come to the table and work together just like we did in 2017. Thanks.
Diane?
As I'm going door to door, this is a big question that I get asked. I believe that CBAC needs to be reopened or opened. I don't want to touch anybody who earned their pension. Nobody wants to see them lose their pension or have it reduced. What we need to do is look going forward. Nobody is guaranteed in the private sector a job until 2027. Nobody is guaranteed a raise until 2027. We need to start looking at how in why they did this, and I would advocate for it to be opened.
John?
My wife's a teacher, so we definitely know about pensions and how that's going to affect her in the future. We've kicked the can long enough in the state. We do have to look at ways to fund our contributions to the people whose commitments we made those commitments to. But in the future, we do have to look at ways to maybe fund the pension fund differently. Maybe it's using all the municipality workers and the state workers. But the one thing is it's just another example of what we did, the state did, is take our money from one budget item, moved it to another, and to another. And, that we have to stop just taking our money that's earmarked for pensions and spending it elsewhere.
Mary?
The pension obligation is mainly the Tier 1 group, which is the oldest group of state workers, served from 1940 to around 1980, and they're the biggest unpaid bill. We have started to pay this group and to stabilize the pension fund. One of the things we did do is stretch out the time period. It's like when you remortgage your house and you add a longer time period, so it is easier to pay it off each year. The teachers fund, it is not repaired. Although they are town workers, the state does have an obligation to help them. We will have to do something similar for the teachers, maybe an initial investment using the lottery funds or some other predictable fund, and then again stretch out a longer time period so that we can help the towns pay the teachers' retirement as well. That will bring some predictability to the whole unfunded liability problem.
Craig?
So a portion of the unfunded problem comes from not properly forecasting. When funds weren't going in there, still they were forecasting that the funds that were in the fund would have a certain rate of return, which has not been seen at all. Within the last 2 years, there was, and Mary referenced it, a refinance of that obligation. Unfortunately, that refinance cost the taxpayers about another $2 billion, and I voted against that refinance because I think the obligation is here. This last year, the Republicans put out a budget called Prioritize Progress, in which a portion of the projected surplus was to be utilized to pay on the teacher's pension and the state employees' pension. Unfortunately, that was not supported by the majority in the legislature. That money that we wanted to go there went to the rainy day fund.
Thank you. Lauren? Go ahead. I'm sorry. Daniel?
I think the bottom line is, we have this multi-decade-long financial disaster that we're in, and overwhelmingly over the last 10 years or so, the cost of that, the cost of those mistakes has been borne overwhelmingly by middle-income people. I mean, we have seen, 2 large tax increases, which overwhelmingly targeted middle-income people, and we've seen a series of very dramatic and large cuts, aiming at towns, aiming at the school systems, the university systems, again, which targeted at us. So I think the question going forward is who's going to pay to make sure that we do this? Is it going to be, teachers? Are we going to ask teachers? I think we absolutely shouldn't. I mean, they've been paying into their fund. I think, we need to insist on a fairer tax system in this state, see, how much revenue we can bring in by asking the wealthiest folks, the people making over $1 million or so, to pay at least the same effective rates that we're paying. And I think if we do that, we'll see a very different situation.
Thank you. Lauren Torres, would you please ask the next question of Diane Pagano?
Okay. Circling back to transportation, do you support the constitutional amendment on the ballot this November to provide a lockbox for the Special Transportation Fund? Should gasoline tax be dedicated to the Special Transportation Fund and not be used for a purpose other than transportation? And what would you consider as an alternate source of funding for the Special Transportation Fund?
The lockbox, with the transportation fund, we need to keep that money where the income that we have, the revenue that we have needs to stay into transportation. We can't be moving it anywhere else. We can't be putting it into the lockbox because we know what happens with the lockbox. It gets reallocated to another area that all of a sudden has an emergency. So we need to start having our legislators look at that and say, we are not moving that money from the lockbox. No. So I would vote no for that.
In theory, a lockbox sounds like a great idea. Like Diane said, you know, as long as the legislature's not going to reach in the back door and take the money out and spend it elsewhere. If we really do take that money and put it in a separate account and not touch it, and as well as the gas tax and different transportation items, then I think it's a good idea. But right now, I would say I'm more leaning toward no on that.
Mary?
I do support the lockbox very strongly, and I encourage everyone to vote for it. It's going to be on the ballot November 6th. The reason is there has been money transferred in both directions. There was money taken from transportation and put in the general fund, and then other years there was money taken from the general fund and put in transportation. That makes it harder to have a workable, safe transportation system. So I hope you will support the lockbox to have this fund separate. There should also be a transportation authority that has charge over the lockbox funds, as is true in Massachusetts. And that way you always know where your money is going to come from to fix your roads and bridges. And a portion of the gas tax was already put into transportation fund this year, but it will not be enough to fix our problem.
Craig?
So I support the concept of a lockbox. The problem is who has the keys to the lockbox. So it was admitted in the legislature that even with this lockbox that's on the ballot, sweeps can still happen. The problem is the language that's before us on the ballot, it doesn't assure that the money really goes in there. And it doesn't assure what the money goes out for. You know, one of the things that we talked about, because there was another lockbox that I was actually part of drafting that defined a transportation project as anything that's defined as transportation as of 2017. The concern is in the future that, you know, like with the state police, they patrol our roads. Well, that's transportation. So now are we going to take the state police payroll out of the special transportation fund? That's not a lockbox. So lockbox is full of holes, and as presented, I'm against.
Daniel?
I think, whether or not we have a lockbox or don't have a lockbox is not the fundamental issue. The question is, why do we continue to see money being taken out of transportation funds to go into other areas? And I mean, the answer is because the state is chronically short on revenue. And so as long as that situation persists, we're going to also have a lockbox for education, or we're going to have a lockbox for, making sure pension obligations are met. So I think fundamentally the issue comes down to the state doesn't have the revenue to meet its obligations, which is why it's constantly scrambling and moving money around. So I think the fundamental issue we need to get to is making sure that the state has the revenue it needs to both, to be investing in, the roads, the bridges, the infrastructure, as well as meeting its other obligations. And we're currently not in a position to do that. So I think, kind of tying the legislature's hand in one area is just going to create problems in different areas.
Liz?
Do I support the lockbox? Yes, I do. And I agree with Mary. I support having a transportation authority to decide what we do with that money. I think that's very, very important. But I'll tell you what I don't support. I don't support prioritize Connecticut's suggestion that we use general obligation bonds to fund the special transportation fund. General obligation bonds are often used for school construction and construction of community health care facilities. I am not okay with, if you are okay with the lockbox, you cannot be okay with using money to from education and community health facilities in order to fund the special transportation fund. General obligation bonds, that's what they're supposed to be used for, and it will severely limit the amount of school construction and upgrades that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Gretchen, could you ask the next question of Donald Crouch?
What specific proposals do you have to make our state and communities more energy efficient, would you support more green technology or return to nuclear power as a possible solution?
I think we have to look at all options. There's definitely green technology that's worthwhile, but looking at nuclear power and different things are an option too. So I really don't have one policy or another on that topic, but I know there's probably more experts that have more opinions on that.
Mary?
We used to be a leader in green technology about 10 years ago. And since then, we've fallen behind our neighbor states of Massachusetts and New York. One of the things that we just did was a bill to change a number of the state's energy goals. And one of the things that I did not like in the bill, some of it I did, but one of the things I did not like was a lower rate of return for solar on residential houses and commercial houses. I think that is going to hurt our spread of alternative technology in the state, and I would rather have the rate set like Massachusetts does to encourage the growth of this industry. And it'll help people save money personally, and it'll help provide technology jobs in the state as well, so it's a double win.
Craig?
So energy and technology, or energy itself, is a very complex area. I sit on the Energy and Technology Committee in the legislature, and it keeps me up late at night reading about all of these new concepts that I never heard about. I'm generally against nuclear power. I have to admit, some people think it's clean energy. I don't, because there is no plan what to do with the rods. And eventually we're just going to have a bunch of rods and no plan what to do with them. And those rods are very dangerous to our environment, and the environment is important to me. Everybody in Hartford that, comes to energy and technology, everybody wants to be a class 1 renewable. So they try and craft what they're doing. We have biodiesel and things like that, because they get more federal benefits if they're a class 1 renewable and they're more looked at kindly. It's a very complex area, and in 1 minute, I cannot give you everything, but I see my time is up.
Dan?
I think absolutely we should be investing in the green bank. I think, the transition to green and renewable energy is incredibly important, for the state, for the economy, for the future of the planet. And so I think absolutely we need to be doing that. I think we also should be looking at how energy is provided here. I mean, if you look at Wallingford, we have Wallingford Electric here. It's among the most, the cheapest, the consistently, best delivered energy anywhere in the state, and it happens to be the only municipal energy. And if you look at other states, even down in Florida, there's a number of cities that have municipal energy there. It works very well, and it gives another potential revenue source for towns that are struggling to figure out how to deal with their budget. So I think the idea to move towards a completely privatized energy system a couple decades ago was a big mistake. And not only do we need to be looking at a shift towards green energy, but how we're providing energy and who owns and controls that energy.
Liz?
I think we absolutely need to work towards more green jobs and incentivize people to go green. Representative Mashinsky and I, when she was talking about that bill, the energy bill, we actually went through that point by point, and we decided what was a pro and what was a con. The problem is that there were almost as many cons as there were pros, and I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot with that. We need to incentivize both businesses and individuals to go green, and I agree that it's the virtual net metering, the lower rate of return, that is really, we're going to see a big difference in the amount of people willing to invest in green energy on the consumer side. I do believe that investing in green energy and green businesses are very, very important. It creates tech jobs, and it's a booming industry, and we are missing the boat currently.
Diane?
And obviously, this is a complex issue, so I believe that we need to continue to work with the companies, discuss all our different options, and then it would be brought to the legislator.
Thank you. Lauren, would you please ask the next question of Mary?
Okay. Drug addiction rates remain a problem, as evidenced by the Chief Medical Examiner's projection last month that deaths from drug overdoses will remain relatively flat in 2018. How does the legislature address substance abuse in the state?
Well, there are a number of things we've already done, and there are some things that need to be done still. Just for Wallingford statistics, we had 53 deaths in about a 3-year period. And we had several hundred overdoses that did not end in death because the fire department or the police department were there with the antidote to wake the person up before they died. So it's a very serious issue, mainly opioids, and most recently fentanyl has supplanted heroin as the problem opioid. And it's a man-made chemical, can be made in the lab, it can be made very cheaply, and it brings more profit to drug dealers. So we have to continue to work on enforcement. We have to continue to place people in emergency rooms that will redirect the addicted person when they're there for temporary treatment. They have to go directly from there to a hospital bed to be treated. It needs more than a month and not discharged to the street. We have already reduced the number of days worth of opioids that can be given as a prescription. I think we're down to 5 days if I remember correctly. And a bill that we worked on this year, which could be tightened, would use the prescription monitoring program to ensure we're not double prescribing people that take painkillers. And that still needs to be tightened up in successive legislation.
Craig?
So while I've been in the legislature, I've been happy about the efforts that we've undertaken with regard to this. You know, we did, when I got up there, I think it was 7 days was the most, and we reduced it to 5. The other thing was the big bill this past session was there's rules with regard to Department of Consumer Protection and licensing and requirements. And we found that there was providers that were not complying with that. So we really tightened up that. We put a procedure in place allowing the Department of Consumer Protection to actually enforce those rules. And I was very happy about that. You know, time will tell as far as the effects, but I think the things that we've done while I've been up there have been helpful, at least in my mind.
Dan?
You know, I think obviously we need to be doing everything we can to make sure, you know, local police and fire have both the training and any equipment and drugs necessary to help anybody that may be experiencing overdose, to make sure in the, you know, the hospitals and so on that you know, people are well trained and ready to prepare for that. But I think, you know, the core issue is that we have pharmaceutical companies dumping, you know, these opioid drugs onto the market that are not, you know, they're not fully disclosing the addictive nature, and a lot of people end up on this path towards overdose by taking prescription drugs, and I think they need to be held accountable for that. You know, Craig talks about being a big advocate for this, but on the town council, you know, everybody, including the mayor, advocated for, you know, joining a municipal lawsuit to hold the pharmaceutical companies accountable, and Craig said that this was unfair to the pharmaceutical companies. So I think there's a lot of questions to go around, both in how to prepare and take care of people that are experiencing this, but where does the problem come from in the first place?
Liz?
I could talk about this all day, so I'm going to try to be quick, though. First, I believe that we need to increase Narcan distribution and training. We've been doing that consistently through the regional action councils, and I want to continue to do that. I know in our area, we do that on a monthly basis. Additionally, we need to increase social emotional learning in schools. That helps young people learn to deal with their problems so they actually don't turn to drugs in the first place. I was very proud to work with Representative Mashinsky on the prescription monitoring program to strengthen that. There's still work to be done, but we're trying to stop doctor shopping. But the main thing that I did in the past 2 years was I worked on the Adolescent Expert Program. I brought it into schools. That's Adolescent Substance Abuse Brief Intervention and Referral to Treatment. I brought this program into schools, and we trained teachers and administrators on how to recognize opioid abuse and drug abuse in general, and how to speak to children and refer them to treatment so that they didn't have to break the bonds of trust between the teacher and the child. As it stands now, they send them to... Sorry, I got cut off. I told you I could talk about it forever. Diane.
I think one of the other areas that we need to look at are the physicians prescribing the medication. I'm a caregiver for seniors, and one of my seniors is on fentanyl. And once we get that prescription, we get it into the home, we don't know what we have it locked up. But what about other homes? Are they locked up? We need education for those people, homes, children. But what about physicians that are overprescribing? We need to start looking at the physicians as to how many prescriptions the patient is getting and evaluating what they are prescribing.
Thank you. John?
We have to start first with education with our youth. I think there has been a lot going on in the schools and teaching them about some of these issues. I think we have to continue with that. And I also think tougher penalties on the drug dealers and also the doctor shopping definitely cannot be allowed in the future.
Thank you. Luther, could you ask the next question of Craig Fishbein?
Craig, do you support the legalization of marijuana in the state of Connecticut? There's been a lot of discussion about how it would create another revenue source, a taxable revenue source.
Generally, I'm not in favor of opening a floodgate merely for more revenue. That being said, I'm generally a proponent of recreational marijuana. So that prevents them from taping this. Anyway, my problem though is twofold at this particular point. First of all, it's illegal under federal law. So something would have to be done federally for me to allow that at the state level. I'm not in favor of a state cajoling its residents into doing something that they can get arrested for. We have the situation where in Colorado, they're having to deal with cash because it's a concern that if the money's in the bank, that the feds are going to come in and take the money. That's just not an appropriate environment economically, morally, fundamentally, any of that. The other problem is testing in the field. How does a police officer who pulls someone over who reasonably thinks that this person may be under the influence of marijuana establish whether or not that's true? The only way that I've been able to figure out that can happen is through taking of blood. So now we're not only a police officer who has a very tough job to begin with, they are now a phlebotomist on the side of the road, taking somebody's blood, ascertaining, the time period through which they last ingested marijuana. Those are two very serious impediments to me being in support of the legalization of recreational marijuana.
Dan?
I do support the legalization of recreational marijuana. I think, as you said, it is another revenue stream for a state that's struggling in a lot of areas with just funding very basic services. I think also, throwing people in prison, the number of people we have in prison for low-level drug offenses, and just the idea of having people in prison for marijuana offenses is kind of outrageous. So I think, just from a moral perspective, it should be legalized. I think there's no justification for keeping it illegal.
Liz?
I absolutely do support it with a couple of caveats. First is that the human brain actually stops developing at the age of 26. So I would like to see it legalized starting at age 26. And secondly, there is now a test strip being marketed for your saliva that they can test on the side of the road. So hopefully now we can bring Representative Fishbein a little closer on board. But the biggest thing I want to talk about is that it is known that marijuana helps people get off opioids, and it helps them to not even start to begin with. There is a study happening at Hartford Hospital on rib fractures, and instead of giving them opioid medication for pain, they are allowing them to use marijuana. And that has shown to significantly reduce patient use of opioids, and that it is providing better pain relief than opioids do to begin with. So I think that it's a dual issue. It's going to help solve the opioid epidemic, and it's also going to bring in some much-needed revenue.
Diane?
So I have another client who is on medical marijuana, and I think that's actually what you might be referring to when you're talking about the opioids and everything. So I think that the medical marijuana is a little bit different than recreational. I think, and you just mentioned the strips, I was not aware of those, so that I would actually have to look into that. But I agree with Representative Fishbein where we don't want somebody just drawing blood on the side of the road. It stays in your system for 30 days. So is it in your system from yesterday, this morning, or from 20 days ago? We need to establish a little bit, I need more information before I would say yes to recreational marijuana.
I'm against legalizing marijuana, especially if we're looking at it just to raise more income for our state. I mean, that ranks right up there with gambling and everything else. So, if we're gonna go down that path, it looks like, a lot of people are for sports betting and marijuana legalization. But, the state should not be in the business of legalizing some of these activities that frankly do a lot of harm to families and others.
Mary?
I'm all for medical marijuana, which we already voted for. It's already in law. I don't want to vote for recreational marijuana. And I tested the district. I do the survey every January to see what the district thinks. The district is exactly split 50-50 on this issue, probably by age if I were to guess. And it's been twice 50-50, last year and this year. What I would rather do is wait and watch Massachusetts struggle with the whole issue first. They're going first. It gives us a chance to watch what they're doing. If I ever approve it, it would have to be, as Liz says, 26 and up. Because it does affect brain development, and kids' brains are still getting formed up till age 25. There should be a test for driving impairment, because we do have evidence from some states of a 6% increase in driving accidents after legalization, and there should be a way to test in any job where reaction time matters.
Thank you.
For job safety.
Gretchen, would you please ask the next question of Daniel Fontaine?
How will you help provide a more stable funding to towns to help better the education systems?
I think this goes back to the point I made earlier, was that we have a system in Connecticut where most of the public services are provided through local property taxes. I think we need to be looking at shifting that system to one which is a more equitable tax system. I think we could be looking at statewide property tax that targets folks or properties over $750,000 a year, and that could provide a more equitable way of dealing with some of that revenue. I think we could look at creating a new top tier of the income tax bracket, as several of the surrounding states, New York, New Jersey, have several points higher. We could use some of that revenue to try to provide to towns and municipalities to offset some of the, both provide the revenue they need for services as well as offset some of the local property taxes. There are a number of services that are predominantly used by the wealthier folks in the financial services industry and so on that are currently not taxed in Connecticut but are taxed in other states. So I think there's quite a few areas to look into getting revenue that both equalizes the tax system, addresses some of the kind of grotesque inequality that we see in the state. We're the third most unequal state in the country in terms of income inequality, and also could provide some revenue for towns and help lower property taxes for regular people.
Liz?
So we fund our schools through something called the Education Cost Sharing Grant. And for X number of years, there was no formula. And so the way we were funding our schools was just kind of arbitrarily throwing money at them. And so what we've tried to do is have a new ECS formula that actually makes sense. And we need to move forward on that. I know that we are starting there. It's going to kind of be a work in progress for a little bit. But if we can find an education cost-sharing grant for our municipalities that actually makes sense and is transparent, I think then we're going to see schools be more equitable.
Diane? I believe we need to keep the power and the control with the Board of Education in the towns. I don't think it is, legislators should be making those decisions.
Don?
One thing the state can't do in the future is change the ECS grant formula mid-budget. In the last year or so when that was going on, Wallingford didn't know, are we going to lose $7 million? Are we going to lose $5 million from the state? Are we going to lose $3 million? We really have to keep that stable for our municipalities to be able to budget properly. And also, money is not always the answer. I do think we have to be fair and reasonable with both our cities and our towns and our ECS funding. However, there's a lot of administrations that they get more money and it doesn't go to the actual teachers to actually teach our students.
Mary?
In some cases, we will have to raise education funds, specifically for closing the achievement gap. Some of the poor cities, the kids are not making it to the same level as the suburban kids, and they need additional hours in school, additional days in school, and probably going to school through the part of the summer to catch up. I believe special education should be part of the state budget, not the town budgets, because it is unpredictable for the towns based on the number of cases moving into the district, which sometimes happens mid-year, and a case will come in, it'll cost another $150,000, which isn't in the budget. We can encourage. Other parts of the country have county government and they do regional purchasing and regional back office functions. We can do that in Connecticut, we're just not used to it. But there's no reason why each town has to buy toilet paper for their schools. There's no reason why each town has to buy heating oil for the schools, separate contracts. It could all be done together. Saves a lot of money. They do that in other parts of the US.
Thank you. Craig?
So there has been an ECS formula for a long time. In fact, I think it was 1983, the case Chef v. O'Neill was filed, which claimed that there was a disparate use and application of the ECS formula. And that decision has been in various forms, and then Judge Muckwarscher issued a decision last year finding that it's never been really applied by the legislature, that educational funding was done more on a political basis than actual application of the ECS formula. So we redid it through the budget, and we're trying to stay to that. But when you say increase funding to the towns, well, increased funding to the towns would be more revenue, which would be an increase in taxes or a shifting from somewhere else. I agree with special education regionalization. That's one of the greatest expenses that our municipalities have for education, and I'm certainly open to that.
Thank you. Lauren Tokores, would you please ask the next question of Liz Lanahan?
Keeping with the theme of regionalization, much has been discussed about trying to reduce costs and duplication by regionalizing municipal services. In your view, besides education, what types of services can be regionalized by consolidation or privatization on a regional basis?
So we've been looking at this in many different directions, and it turns out that there are certain services that lend themselves well to regionalization, and that would be police and fire dispatch. And I know that some of my municipalities have been looking for that, and the way that we're trying to make that happen is by upgrading our communications systems all at the same time and work with ones that work with each other. So that way, if we ever get to the point where we can regionalize, it makes sense and it doesn't cost us a lot more money. So I believe in regionalization for those services, but I do think it's going to take a little bit of time to ramp up to do that, right? Because all of these things need to work together. So I think that the time needs to start now for towns to start working together so that we can put our comm systems on the same level through the same companies and things like that. So when we do go to regionalization, it will cost us less to do that and continue to cost us less down the road as we're using it.
Thank you. Diane?
There are some healthcare facilities that I believe that should be now privatized, and when we start getting these like senior living and put them more into a regionalization, we will start seeing cost savings there.
Don?
Some of the stuff I think we could definitely look at is stronger buying power, as Mary said earlier, toilet paper and different items just like that. I think, if we can reduce our costs by having a stronger buying power, I mean, maybe we look at insurance, retirement funds, different things like that. Police and fire dispatch, I know that's been something we've talked about in Wallingford for quite a number of years. And even with education, I mean, Derby and Ansonia are looking at regionalization. I think that's one of those things where in theory it sounds good. It would probably take a little while before everybody's on board with it. But if we can lower our expenses in the municipality level, then our tax burden is going to be less on residents as well.
Mary?
We're known as the land of steady habits for a very good reason, because we don't like to try new things that are being done elsewhere across the country. We resist. But other parts of the country are actually pretty comfortable with this regional idea, and they save a lot of money that way. You can regionalize purchase of equipment, and then different towns rotate the equipment. You can regionalize back office functions. For example, you can set up a payroll system, and 4 towns will use the payroll system to pay their teachers. You can purchase as a group of towns could do energy efficiency contracting, which rewards saving money in each school system. We did it by ourselves in Wallingford, but you could do it with a bunch of towns and save money. The state of Connecticut has 3.5 million people. You only need 1 to 3 call centers for the entire state with the technology that exists today. We have 51 call centers. Why do we have 51? Because that's the way we used to do it. And that's the only reason. The whole state of California works off 3 call centers. The city of Houston works off 1 call center.
Craig?
Thank you. So, the buying power, the strong buying power issue, different towns have different rules. I know here in Wallingford, at a certain level, when they go to buy toilet paper and things like that, the town likes to buy from local, within the town, so, perhaps you tread on that. Maybe there is a benefit, it's a discussion to have, but, regionalization sometimes works the opposite way. We had this whole proposal when I first got to the legislature about regionalizing health districts. And we found through looking at that it was actually going to cost, my towns of Wallingford and Cheshire millions of dollars more to run their health district because it was benefiting the cities. They wanted us to be part of New Haven, the health district. And, so regionalization there would have been counter to cost savings.
Thank you. Dan?
I think regionalization is actually incredibly important to, solving some of the cost burden that happens in the state. I remember a few months ago there was a segment done by, I think, NBC Connecticut, which looked at families that had moved from Connecticut down to the Carolinas and seen their taxes basically cut in half, and they dug in over a period of time and looked at what the major differences between the states that caused that difference in taxes, and then number one overwhelming reason they found was that things were regionalized, done on a county level down there. So I think if, Connecticut, we want to see taxes go down on working people, regionalization is a really important part of that. I think the idea of privatizing is a completely different issue. I mean, if you're talking about privatizing hospitals, basic services, I mean, you're either going to end up cutting quality or you're going to end up cutting access. And if you don't do that, you end up increasing the cost, because not only now are you paying profits to a private entity, if it's an essential service, you also have to create a new department to regulate it. So,
Thank you. Luther, would you please ask the next question of Diane Pagano?
Diane, should the legislature consider approving legalized sports betting?
Oh, boy. Yeah. So right now, I am going to say no. I don't think that there's enough of information out there regarding it. I know that Don had touched on it because there's other abuses in other areas. I'm going to say that it could lead to other things where you might have somebody betting and for a team, the Red Sox or something, and then it could lead to some just dangerous areas because within it, you might have people throwing games and things like that. So I don't necessarily think that until we know more or look at what other studies have done, we can't legalize it in Connecticut.
John?
I'm against legalizing sports betting. I do not think sports betting, and even to extent expansion of casinos, gambling is something that does affect our families. On the surface, it sounds like, hey, yeah, I want to watch the game and put some money on it like they do in Vegas. But, at the end of the day, a lot of people take their hard-earned money, they lose it, and then more problems happen. So I'm against sports betting.
Mary?
Well, philosophically, I was initially, but I sit on the Finance Committee, and I found out from a report to the Finance Committee that there's something like 70 million already being bet in Connecticut yearly. So people are betting on the teams now, which could also impact the outcome of games. It's currently going on in Connecticut. So although we would have to pay a fee to the major leagues, both football and baseball, and they've insisted on that, it is true that it's already going on in Connecticut. So I'm open to the idea of formalizing it and recognizing it.
Craig?
So, where are we? We're October. I think September I was for, and this month I'm against. I go back and forth on this issue. I sit on public safety, which, believe it or not, has cognizance over gambling. And we had a joint meeting. There was a bunch of committees, and we had Major League Baseball and NBA come in and talk to us about this. Ultimately, I'm concerned about the relationship between the state and the sport. If there is some sort of nefarious activity going on in the sport, what guarantee is the state going to give the people that are betting on those games? That's a concern. I got to tell you, the unintended consequences, that I can sit at my computer and make a wager on a game, I just see having a lot of people having problems. But then the fundamental, let people do what they're going to do tugs at my heartstrings. So I have no answer for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan?
I also have concerns about the addictive nature of betting. I really have to see the details of the proposal. What exactly are we talking about? Can you sit at your computer and just get involved with sports betting, or is it more contained to a casino-like environment? And so I think the details matter a lot for me. So I don't have a clear answer on that either.
Liz?
Well, Mr. Fontaine, I'm happy to give you some of that information. So yes, I am for legalized sports betting. The proposal that, or actually I shouldn't say the proposal, but it is the deal that was being tossed around would be that you cannot do that from your computer except for fantasy football, but there would be geotagging, which basically means that this betting can only be done on a secure site that is only capable around a certain area. So it would be like highlight places, right? And so you would go there and be able to, the geotagging would allow you access to that betting. The devil is always in the details, so we do need to work that out more. But I don't think we are in any position, number one, to cut off any possible funding source. And secondly, people do it anyways. Let's give them a nice, safe place to be able to do that.
Thank you. Lauren, would you please ask the next question of Donald Crouch?
Okay. Government has the responsibility to support education, healthcare, public safety, and other services that are not profit centers. Do you think that government should be run more like a business, and how do you see that being possible?
You know, there are a lot of services that are not profit centers that you mentioned. You know, one way to run it more like a business is actually just looking at our state budget and looking how we just overspend and overspend. It's easy to just say, you know what, it's other people's money and we're just going to raise taxes and we'll just bring in quote unquote more revenue. But revenue is really just tax increases or more fees. So one area that I do think is, you know, zero-based budgeting. You know, our way in the past is we look at it and say, well, we had 100 million last year. This year we have to go at least 105 million because we have to increase it a certain percentage. But I do think we have to start and say, what do they need 105 million, or can they get by with maybe less? It's not always an easy question of just saying yes or no to how much money they need, but we do need to look at those areas and say from a zero-based accounting and go from there.
Mary?
Well, government is different from business in that it serves people and it serves their needs. And to some extent, the cost of something based on a caseload. For example, our largest expense is Medicaid. And you have people that go to nursing home when they get old and cannot be taken care of at home. And you don't know if that person's going to live for 3 months or if they're going to live for 2 years or what. But government is helping that person to survive and be safe until the day of their death, because when people run out of personal funds, they now become Medicaid patients. Results-based accountability is one thing I've included in bills that deal with the Appropriations Committee, and it is now part of contracts that the state does for services. So results-based accountability says, how much did you do? How well did you do it? Are your clients better off? And if you can answer all those questions in your report, you'll get paid. And if you can't, you won't get another contract.
Craig?
So, you know, because government does provide for people, you know, at its core, people that are the most vulnerable, it's impossible to totally run government like a business. But I think whenever possible, it should follow those philosophies. An example is when we look at DCD and what they do with business investment. You know, I was recently looking at an application where a lot of money was given to a group, and they admitted that they weren't going to hire anybody utilizing those funds. They were going to use your tax dollars to develop a technology and then sell the technology and keep the profit. You know, that is not something that a business would do. And that is not a philosophy, and that's not a pattern that our government should follow also. So whenever possible, government should be run like a business when it's practical.
Dan?
I don't even know what it means to run a government like a business. I mean, are we talking about the government should be aiming to profit off of the citizens? Should we have a government which only decides to provide services when it's in their interest to do so, or if it's profitable for them to do so? I mean, the reason we have a lot of the government programs, as Mary was pointing out, for healthcare, for education, and so on, is because private businesses are often unable or incapable of providing those at a price that's affordable for everybody. So it comes down to business to, or it comes down to government to be able to provide these things. And so, you know, the funding of the government's not always predictable. The costs aren't always predictable. And I think the idea that it should be aiming to always be neutral, pay all its bills in every instance, doesn't make a lot of sense.
Liz?
Once again, I am always in agreement with Representative Mushinski. You know, I too have been advocating for results-based accountability. So if we look at it like that, we have to say it's not running it like a business, it's running government like a nonprofit. And we have to do the best with what we've got, and we need to make sure that we are not spending too much on things that don't produce the intended outcomes. So we need to look at the entire budget in that way. I have been working in nonprofits for a long time, and that is how I created my budgets, using results-based accountability. And as someone else said, zero-based budgeting. You don't build off of a budget and say, we got $1 million last year, let's go for 1.2. It's about looking at your intended outcomes, working backwards from there to make sure that you are actually helping the people that you're supposed to help without spending money on things that don't actually help at all. We want to protect the most vulnerable. And I don't believe businesses do that, but I do believe nonprofits do that. So I think instead of looking at it like running a business, we look at it like running a nonprofit.
Thank you. Diane?
I'm an advocate of the zero-based budget. So you let every department has zero, and then you add what they need, not what they want. We do run our homes like that. If we decide that we're gonna buy cable and we can't afford 5,000 stations, but we can afford 500, well, that's where you bring it down. So we need to start looking, the government needs to start looking at it as a business, as a zero-based budget. You have nothing, what do you need? And then what do you need, not what do you want?
Thank you. Luther, would you please ask the next question of Mary Mashinsky?
Mary, what can be done to keep the state from consistently having budget deficits?
Well, we have been, this is not well known, but we've cut $6 billion out of the budget. I know there was one year we cut $830 million in one fell swoop. We've reduced the workforce by 20%. We have higher co-pays of state workers and higher percentage contribution to their pensions. We've gotten rid of mailings and used technology instead to reduce costs. There's a whole set of things like that we've been working on. And we're gonna have to do it again next year because we already know we're gonna be $2 billion short in each of the next 2 years. So once again, we'll have to look at consolidation. We've merged agencies. We tried last year, and this didn't fly with the regulators in Boston, but we tried last year to put all the community colleges into one administrative system, like we did with State University system. And it was rejected. It was said to be too quick. We need more time to make that change. So, and results-based accountability, which we're doing on the contracts now. So we have to just keep using the efficiency steps because we are going to have to find another $2 billion from the $20 billion budget.
Craig?
So why does a deficit occur? Either you are underestimating your expenditures or you're overestimating your revenue. You know, I think to the most part, except for overtime, the expenditures are pretty much in line with what is projected. So we have to look at the revenue side. You know, major part of revenue is income taxes. We have people leaving the state and taking their money with them. You know, that I think is a major part, a major cause of deficits. You know, just looking at the general concept of deficits. So if we incentivize, we lower taxes, we create a better economy here in the state, then I think you're going to be able to project better and you're going to not deal with as many deficits.
Dan?
I think, you know, fundamentally it's about bringing in revenue. I think the idea that wealthy folks are leaving the state because they're being overtaxed is absolutely not borne out by the evidence now. We have a number of studies, including one done at Stanford, that show that there's no correlation in Connecticut or anywhere else between the local tax and the state tax rate and the migration of wealthy folks. So I think the idea that we're taxing people out of the state or that we're somehow going to increase revenues by having these dramatic cuts to taxes, especially taxes that target the wealthy, and instead put it onto us is crazy. I mean, fundamentally what we need to do is we need to insist that the wealthiest folks in the corporate sector in this state pay at least the same tax rates that everybody else is paying. You know, I run a small business. Corporations are paying lower effective tax rates than small business people here in the state. We have hedge fund managers paying less than people, you know, just regular working folks in our town. So I think if we address that issue, we'll have the revenue we need.
Liz?
So we do need to look at how we are forecasting the revenue. We need to be not only truthful about what we think is going to come in, but also I think we need to forecast conservatively. I think that's important. In addition, we need to increase efficiency and reduce waste. Something we really need to look at is we need to pay more to debt service, and we need to stop bonding so much. All of these things will work together, and then we can get a handle on the state's finances.
Diane?
We need to start lowering our taxes, because when I'm going door to door, people, that is one of their major concerns, is lowering our taxes. They are moving out of state. They are saying to me, you know, my child is a junior in high school. As soon as that child graduates, we are leaving. We can no longer afford the taxes here. We can't afford our small business here anymore. And fortunately, sometimes they can take that small business away from Connecticut and bring it to South Carolina. 2 people last weekend told me specifically that they cannot afford to live here anymore because of the taxes, and that scares me.
Don?
You know, the easy answer is stop spending more than we bring in. It's not the only answer. You know, Dan talked about people moving out of the state and it's not affecting. I remember Governor Malloy saying, I have to redo the budget because one of the big money guys in Greenwich moved to Florida. So, I mean, people are moving out of the state. I know 5 families that moved out of Wallingford and North Haven in the last 6 months. If we keep people in this state, we will bring in more revenue.
Gretchen, would you please ask the next question of Craig Fishbein?
What specific project or issue do you want to address that would target the towns you represent? Would it cost the state any money to address this specific concern, and why is this issue/project so important?
I need the 2 minutes to think about that. What specific project at a state level for my towns? You know, I don't have a specific project. You know, I bring to the state a philosophy that I think helps my towns. I certainly am not in favor of more regulation. I'm certainly, you know, generally pro-business. Things that come across my desk, I look at them with that eye. You know, I think on a state level, you have to look at it more on a macro basis than a micro basis. You know, it's a good question, and I don't have a specific answer, so I don't want to waste everybody else's time with that, so thank you.
Dan?
What I'd love to see is a fair tax system in the state. I think, you know, as Republicans up here with me tonight have pointed out, there's a lot of people that are in fact leaving the state because they feel that the state's unaffordable. The question is, who are those people? And it's overwhelmingly middle-income people in our towns that are finding the burden increasingly put onto them. So I think if I could do and accomplish anything, it would be to get a more equitable tax system that takes some of the burden off of us. I think, you know, this, you know, on one side they're saying they want to get a fair tax system, but on the other side they're proposing a tax scheme of eliminating the income tax, which is certain to dramatically raise local property taxes on us much more than any savings we're going to see from the decrease in our income tax. So I think we need a serious and realistic proposal, which includes tax fairness, insisting that the very wealthy pay at least what we're paying.
Liz?
Can you repeat the question, and then specifically, are you looking at the macro or micro level for our towns?
So the question was, do you have a specific project or issue you would like to address that would target your towns, and if it would cost any money to the state, and why this issue is so important? I was looking more on a micro level.
Okay, great, thank you. I have 3 towns, so I'll start with Wallingford, and then I'll be quiet when my time is up. So the Commerce Committee, we looked at expanding the enterprise zone to include the Bristol-Myers Squibb building here in Wallingford for reasons that escape me. For some reason, the mayor wasn't interested in having us do that, even though it it didn't make him do anything. It gave him yet another tool in the toolbox to bring a business in. That was something I was really interested in, and I'd like to continue to do that. Secondly, for the town of Cheshire, there is a bit of land over by 691 that I was looking to have given to Cheshire, and Cheshire would be a pass-through entity to sell it and give the money back to the state in order for us to use that for economic development. For Southington, we were looking at also possibly having some floating zones, but that's more on the municipal level. I think I got it in time. And no, none of that would cost the state any money.
Diane?
So I've been running since January, and I have never considered myself a politician until this moment. I'm going to take your question and twist it around to answer it the way I want to answer it. Okay. So I'm going to say, going door to door, the biggest thing that I've learned is term limits. People are telling me we do not want term limits anymore. Diane, you need to start focusing on that, and if you get elected, we want you to either extend them or something. So if they are extended, say right now they're 2 years, one term is 2 years, to change it to 4 years, it could be an approximate savings of $4.8 million because of the Citizens Election Program. So that is how I will save you money. How'd you like that one?
Don?
I don't think it's always about the money or what you bring back to your district. You know, I think the biggest thing for our towns, you know, is being fair with them during the budget season and making sure we're not changing the game midstream, letting them, you know what the rules are up front so that they can budget appropriately for education, and not get caught, off guard mid-season.
Mary?
A couple things. One would be, we need vaping laws that are effective. There's a big increase in kids vaping all kinds of things with little tiny devices that look like a flash drive, and doing it in both high schools, and I'm aware of it from the Coalition for a Better Wallingford, and they have asked me to look at changing the law to make it easier to keep vaping away from kids. We got them to not smoke, but now they're starting to vape, and it's a 25% increase over last year. Well, Wallingford also needs solar technology allowed in town. There is no utility subsidy for solar to front load the solar in Wallingford. So you can live in any other town in Connecticut and you can have solar in your house, but not in Wallingford. I would like to see what I can do to, with the help of the state, to encourage solar technology in town, which is very rare in Wallingford because of our unique municipal utility.
Thank you. Lauren Tokores, would you please ask the next question of Daniel Fontaine?
Small business has come up quite a bit tonight, and small business is particularly affected by mandates, taxing, and increasing expenses. And generally, the largest expenditure for a small business is wages. Minimum wage in the state went up to $10.10 in 2017, and there is now a proposal to increase it to $15 an hour. Would you support a further increase, and should it be indexed with inflation?
I do support the increase to $15 an hour. I think if you look at the history of the minimum wage, the peak of the minimum wage in Connecticut was right around 1968 at about $12 an hour. Since that time, we've gone down $2 an hour in in today's dollar terms. But the society as a whole is about 4 times as wealthy as we were at that time. Productivity is about quadrupled, and the per person wealth in the country has about done the same. So I think the idea that 40-something years ago we could afford a $12 minimum wage, and now we have 4 times as much wealth per person, and we can't afford to have a $15 minimum wage doesn't make any sense. I think if you look at the people making minimum wage, I'm not so concerned about high school students making tacos. What I'm concerned about is we have a lot of folks now that we've seen the manufacturing leave and a shift in the economy. A lot of people are in retail. We've seen a collapse of private sector unions, which was a major driving force in keeping wages up for generations. So I think absolutely we need to make sure that people are making a living wage. I think if you're doing any type of work which is, socially beneficial and you're working hard at it, you're working full time, you should be able to pay for your basic expenses. I mean, this is among the wealthiest states and the wealthiest country in the history of the world. They're able to do this. In other places, you have parts of Europe, for example, where wages being paid at fast food restaurants is about $20 an hour. It's not done through a minimum wage, it's done through unions and other mechanisms. But I mean, the idea that we can't afford that here, that it's going to crush everybody, there may be some inflation associated with it in the fast food restaurants and at the very low end of the sector, but that's more than made up for by the increased demand in the local economy, the increased wages that people see. So I think absolutely it's worth doing. It's something we can do. I think the idea that it's going to kill business is not borne out by any type of evidence. It's a scare tactic.
Liz?
While the original bill up in the legislature was for $15 minimum wage, that was not ultimately what was going to be voted on. What was supposed to come up at the end of the session was a $1 increase in the minimum wage, and I absolutely support that. As far as looking at should it be indexed as we move forward, I think that does work. And we need to also remember that we're talking about this arbitrary living wage. But it's very important to actually find out what that is. Here in Wallingford, I believe you have to make something like $24 an hour to be able to afford an apartment for a family of 4. Mm-hmm. So it would not be a livable wage to make $10.10. So we really need to think about that. We have a great many people who, single moms especially, single parents I should say, who are trying to come to our fantastic school systems and live here when they're not able to do so because of a $10.10 minimum wage. So we need to look at that, and we need to, I'll cut off again.
Thanks. Diane?
So I sent in an op-ed about the minimum wage to the Record Journal, so anybody can read it more specifically. But I will bring out two companies right now, Amazon and Stop and Shop. Amazon has raised their minimum wage to $15. Well, the employees were so happy until they found out that they no longer were getting a higher raise that year. They also didn't get their stock option, which it's approximately $1,700. And then they had certain benefits taken away from them. So although they got the $15, they actually made hourly wages less. The other one is Marty the robot. He now goes through Stop and Shop's aisles and determines if there needs to be more products on the shelf or if the floor needs to be cleaned. That just took somebody's job away. So that $15 an hour is fantastic, but you were just replaced by a robot.
Don?
We do not need to have the state mandate a $15 minimum wage. A lot of companies pay a lot more money than that per hour. But the unintended consequences, you raise it to $15, then the business owner, one, they're paying more per hour, then they're also paying more in their payroll taxes, so we don't think about that. And then before you know it, the business owner is saying, I can't afford these 10 employees, I'm gonna only have 8, and then it's gonna go down. So, it's not just about the worker or the business, we have to make things that are fair and reasonable for everyone involved.
Mary?
I do support a minimum wage increase, couple steps phase in to $15. And the reason is that United Way has told us that Wallingford living costs are $24 an hour for a family. And that's just for the housing part. So if you have 2 parents and they each are working minimum wage in a retail job, for example, full time, 40 hours a week, they're still not making it. And what that forces them to do is work a second job. They're not home when their kids get home. They don't eat supper with their kids. The kids are loose. And there's more stress on the family. They're not living the American dream, that's for sure. So I would definitely allow them to have a living wage so they could live in Wallingford, work a full-time job, and then go home and see their family. That's the way we always thought it should be in America, and that's what I support. We could do limits for people who are on temporary summer jobs that aren't the major wage earner of their family, but I think for adults working full-time, 40 hours a week, they should be able to live here.
Thank you. Craig?
So the specter of the evil business owner permeates the question and the answers. You know, the American dream is based upon working hard and getting paid well for your working hard. You know, the arbitrary determination as to what a living wage is arbitrary. The minimum wage is a beginning and not an end. And as Diane Pagano pointed out, actually it's counterintuitive. You end up losing jobs. We see, you know, mechanization in places like McDonald's and things like that. Ultimately, prices increase as a result of paying higher wages, and therefore it becomes cyclical, because then the person that goes in to pay that, you know, to buy that product, to pay for that service, can't pay for that, so the whole cost of living goes up, so then we have the wage again. So I'm against the $15 minimum wage.
Thank you. Dan? I'm sorry. Right. Luther, would you please ask the next question of Liz Linehan?
Liz, where do you stand on increasing aid to the state cities?
So we need to have vibrant urban centers in order to attract young people. If you look at the reason why we're not attracting people, it's really because there's not much to do. So we need to, like I said, have those vibrant urban centers. Whether or not that means increasing aid, I'm not sure. I think that it could be a combination of things, including just making it easier for businesses to come there, and making. So, for instance, there was something floating around that we would have in certain urban areas, there would be less business taxes for a certain amount of time to bring businesses in order to make that a vibrant urban area. There are ways, there was interest in having tech hubs, all of those things. I don't know if that necessarily means increasing aid, but it means working with the cities in order to create vibrant urban centers to bring young people to stay here.
Diane?
I would be interested to see where that aid would be allocated to. We just bailed out Hartford, $500 million. Wallingford was tightening their purse strings. They did everything they were supposed to do to make sure that there was enough funding in their budget for their town. And now $500 million goes to Hartford to bail them out. They should have declared bankruptcy. I would be skeptical on where aid would go.
Don?
Some people talked about results-based accounting before. I think if we're going to give our cities more money, are we going to look at the results? In the past, you know, like Diane said, we're bailing out Hartford. We're just giving money with no end in sight. So it's not, like I said earlier, it's not about always the money. It's about how we spend our money. And in the cities, you know, they have to also be responsible with the money they do get from the state and not just overspend.
Mary?
Millennial workers who we're trying to attract to Connecticut, but they like to go to Boston and New York City. They like an exciting place to live. They like to take public transit, they don't like to drive, and they like to get to work and then go to the beer pub later and talk about their latest invention with other people their age. And my own kids have told me this, by the way. Said, you know, you need more beer pubs in Wallingford, Mom. GE actually told Boston that one of the things that got them to move is that they couldn't even go outside and buy a sandwich, and they didn't want to live on a suburban campus. They wanted to live right near very smart MIT graduates, and that's what the main reason was why they went to Boston. One of the problems our historic cities has is that they have so much tax-exempt property that they cannot raise enough property tax to run the place, and we have to deal with that historic problem probably by regional shared services.
Thanks. Craig?
You know, growing up, spent a lot of time in Hartford, a lot of concerts, a lot of hockey games. Hartford isn't what it used to be. I believe there should be aid to the cities, but I think it should be on a fair basis. You know, when some of us voted for the budget that ended up funding $500 million for Hartford, I doubt that many people in that room knew that was going down, with all due respect. A lot of us were shocked, and, and New Haven was shocked. Why do they get all this money if Hartford, why don't they get money too? I think there should be support for the cities, but just on a fair basis. The tax exempt thing, my understanding is that Hartford is one of the only towns in the state that's allowed to tax at a lower percentage than any other city in the state. And, that's not fair either. So the whole thing has to be looked at holistically.
Thanks. Dan?
I disagree with the whole framing of the debate over this. I mean, the idea of giving aid to the cities, if you look at Hartford and New Haven, I mean, Hartford, I think the number is about 51% of their real estate is tax exempt. New Haven, it's about 54%. And a lot of this is with, universities, state buildings, hospitals, and so on. These are facilities that people in the surrounding towns benefit from overwhelmingly, and we're supposed to pay for that by a payment into the pilot program, payment in lieu of taxes to help the cities run and recuperate some of that lost revenue. And that's been underfunded for years. So I think the idea that the towns are giving aid to the cities, I mean, it's actually quite the reverse. The cities are providing all kinds of services to the towns they're doing it without getting any payment for it. So we need to equalize and make the entire system more fair for everybody.
Thank you. Gretchen, would you please ask the last question of the evening to Diane Pagano?
Yes, Mary Mishinsky earlier talked about vaping, and I wanted everyone to expand on the topic. Tobacco and nicotine and other substances that are being inhaled through vaping is a huge problem within high schools and middle schools across Connecticut, and I was just wondering if there's anything the state legislator can do to prevent children from obtaining these substances.
Another good question, Gretchen. I would have to say we would have to crack down on the distributors and make sure that they are selling to the proper age. And I'll be honest with you, I don't even know too much about the vaping. I don't know if it's 18 or and above. So I would say that we would just need to start cracking down more on who is the distributor.
Don?
I think we need to have consumer protection, be able to enforce it just like tobacco and alcohol, and really get that under control.
Mary?
Well, because I came to the debate tonight, I didn't get to read my email, but I actually already asked a question of legislative research about where are the holes in the laws about vaping, and they just gave me the answer. So I got ready for next year's bill, but I haven't read it yet, so it's still in the computer. But apparently we are going to have to change some laws, especially on the distribution, and we probably need to raise the age for both tobacco and vaping to 21 for starters, to try to protect developing brains. The thing with the vaping is one pod gives you the equivalent of an entire pack of cigarettes, and the kids don't even understand that. They take one pod and they smoke it in the vaping device, and they're getting an entire pack of nicotine, which is going to get them hooked real bad. It's going to be very tough to get them off the nicotine after that experience. So I want to fix this as soon as possible, close the loophole as soon as possible.
Craig?
So some would think that this deep voice I was born with, but actually I used to smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day. And I quit by a tool that's like a vaping sort of thing. And I thought until recently that that's what this thing was for, is to help people get off of nicotine. And then we had a presentation to the town council a few weeks ago. The police department was here and explaining about all of the problems and concerns. The pods are refillable, so you have, marijuana and other substances going in there. I mean, they're already illegal for 18-year-olds, and I'm certainly open to the 21. I know last night I heard on the news, it's similar, that Hartford passed a local ordinance banning the sale of tobacco to anybody under the age of 21. All of those things need to be looked at the state level.
Dan?
Yeah, I agree. I think the vaping is a huge threat. I think people especially young people view it as a safer alternative to cigarettes. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest it's safer. It may or may not be, but there's a lot of problems associated with it. I think we should raise the age to 21, and I think we need to make sure we're doing everything we can to educate people in the schools that this isn't necessarily a safe alternative to cigarettes.
So I'm a mom, not only to my own 3 kids, but I'm a mom figure to about 50 young Democrats at Cheshire High School, and we talk about this a lot. So I do agree that we need to increase the age to 21. I believe that we need to increase scientific-based education regarding vaping in schools during health class, but the most important thing we need to do is restrict marketing to children. No more flavors. That shouldn't be sold, number 1. Number 2, we should restrict their ability to advertise in places that are frequented by children and underage individuals, and we need to, you can't market alcohol with a cute little cuddly animal. You shouldn't be able to market these items with the same types of things. How we restrict marketing alcohol to children should be the same, and cigarettes, should be the same for vaping. And I can go on, but I don't want that big yellow sign again.
Thank you. That concludes the question and answer portion of the program. Each candidate will now have 3 minutes to make a closing statement. Mr. Crouch, will you please begin?
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the Wallingford community women for hosting the event. Also thank Jean, Luther, Gretchen, and Lauren for participating tonight. The first thing, I would like to see accomplished when getting into Hartford is reducing our state spending, lessen the tax burden on our families and businesses, make Connecticut more affordable, and also no on tax increases, no on tolls, and I ask for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Mary?
I've put my experience and skills to work for the town of Wallingford and did make a difference this year, protecting Wallingford in a couple of very tough budget years. I had already told you how we had cut $6 billion from the budget, but I was able to defend my town. I won back municipal aid equivalent to $749 a year per household that would have gone on the property tax, and now there's a property tax benefit of $1,338 per household from state assistance. I fought back the raid, and some of my colleagues here helped me, by MDC, the Water and Sewer District of Hartford. They tried to take our sewage treatment money away, which was $47 million, and we were able to beat them and kill that bill. This year, the seniors in my survey asked for help with Social Security taxes. We did put that in the budget, so we took taxes off Social Security and phased it out on pensions. I worked on improving personal economy for people, pay equity for women, tried to increase the minimum wage, try it again next year, and especially apprenticeships, which has been my focus of attention, which does get people into a higher wage after 8 weeks, and improve quality of life, including protecting the healthcare benefits and also extending the linear trail. And next session, it will be a tough year again. I'll do more of incorporating efficiency recommendations into the budget, which will be a lean budget, and help the workforce adapt to the new jobs that pay very well if you have the proper training. You can earn $70,000 in advanced manufacturing right here in Wallingford if you have the correct training. And support maintaining our health care, fix our transportation system, and roll out the state water plan, which has not been talked about tonight, but it's new for Connecticut. I hope to keep working on this, and I would appreciate your support on November 6th. And thank you for the panel for your questions and for Community Women for sponsoring this.
Thank you. Craig?
I thank the Wallingford Community Women for sponsoring this. It's always a great event. And Luther, Gretchen, Lauren, for your great questions. So thank you. You know, there was a group of soldiers that were passing through the Rocky Mountains, and they had gotten lost. They were hungry. It was getting dark, and they had realized that their leader had set them astray. They'd given up. Then a soldier who was new to the group looked in his bag and he found a map, and he plotted a course. He was bold and confident in setting that course. He guided his soldiers back to civilization, and hours later, when they were fed and warm, the patrol leader walked over, looked at the map, said, "That's not even of the Rocky Mountains, it's of the Sierra Nevadas." Soldier looked at the patrol leader and he said, "Well, sometimes when others are lost, vision, confidence, and leadership will do over any map." Currently, our state is lost. Over the last 8 years, and actually before that, we've been set on a course astray. I've been in my first term in the legislature, and I think I've attempted to guide that course back. I can tell you that I've been extremely active in our Republican caucus. When things have come to us and ideas, I've stood up and have been sometimes one of the sole voices. In fact, my first year in the legislature, I voted against my own party more than anyone else. I tend to look at the actual item. They make fun of me because I read everything. And I want to know what I'm voting on. It's very difficult to say no. Very easy to say yes. I say no a lot, but I think I'm doing the right thing. I have always stood for smaller government, lower taxes, and less interference in the day-to-day affairs of our law-abiding citizens. I intend to continue that. I've changed things for the better, not only here in Wallingford, but in Hartford as well. And I hope that the citizens and voters see that and support me on November 6th. Thank you, and God bless America.
Daniel Fontaine.
So, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and the moderators. This has been a great event, and I am really thankful to have had the opportunity to participate in it. I think Connecticut is at a major crossroads in our history. For decades we've been a leader, in education and providing some of the best jobs and some of the best living standards. But we see all that potentially going away at any time now. I mean, we see states around us moving forward with providing things like tuition-free community college, raising their minimum wage potentially in Massachusetts to $15 an hour, providing better living standards for people. And Connecticut seems to be doing exactly the opposite. We're making huge cuts to K through 12 education. We've had proposals by Representative Fishbein and others to transform our state university systems from public universities to enterprise funds, which is essentially equivalent to privatizing them. I mean, if you think at UConn or Southern or Central expensive today, wait until you're paying prices of a private university. So I think the idea that fundamentally we're going to fix the state by having these huge cuts to basic services that everybody depends on is wrong. It's harming the same people that we're supposed to be helping, middle income and working class people. So what we need is a fairer tax system in the state. We're a state that struggles with immense inequality. We've seen that inequality grow substantially over recent decades, and we have a state which is heavily dependent on the property taxes here, and the way we handle property taxes is that we have some of the wealthiest folks cloistered into small areas in the corner of the state where they can get away with paying very low rates, and then sky-high rates for services here, where every year our taxes seem to be going up and the quality of the services are going down. So I think what we need is actual leadership and a bold vision for, it's one thing to talk about cutting taxes, but let's look at the whole cost of living in the state. Healthcare is going up, public education, state public education is getting more expensive. Our roads and bridges are crumbling, the opportunity for jobs is diminishing, and so we need to really have a plan for pushing back against the onslaught of, middle class life here in the state, and that's what I intend to do. I agree with Craig that it's hard to stand up to your party, but that's exactly what I intend to do as well. If you we haven't had anybody really talking about or fighting for a fair tax system in the state, and that's the only thing that realistically is going to get some of the burden off of us without hurting us and raising our cost of living in a myriad of other ways. So I hope you'll come out and vote for me on November 6th.
Liz Linehan?
Thank you. I'd like to thank our hosts and moderators for the evening. Thank you very much for your time. I'm glad I'm here tonight, as 2 years ago my kids were touching a rabid skunk at this moment and I had to go get them shots. So I'm glad to finally be here. In 2016, I knocked on over 10,000 doors, and this year my team and I are quickly approaching that number again. And overwhelmingly, I heard that they needed their elected officials to keep the promises that they made. And back in 2016, I promised two things. One is I would always stand up for the middle class. And two is that I would fight my party when I needed to. And I can say unequivocally that I did those things. I fought Governor Malloy's budget cuts to our towns, $14 million in his budget for Wallingford. I was one of only 2 legislators to publicly testify against that budget, calling it a direct assault on the middle class. I also said that I would fight for every dollar in state aid, and we did. We brought back about $1,300 in state aid and property taxes per household in Wallingford. And as my good friend Mary Mashinsky noted, that together we fought against a $47 million cut to Wallingford reimbursement for the wastewater treatment plant, which equals somewhere around $2,000 per household that we've saved you. I co-introduced a bill to effectively eliminate the income tax on Social Security, pensions, and annuities, making it easier for people to retire in our state. Additionally, Wallingford is a designated STEM town, which I'm very proud of, and I've paired our students with manufacturers for jobs and apprenticeships without college debt, and I will continue to work towards that. To continue to do that. I also authored and passed a law to protect your health care regardless of what happens on the federal level. Something near and dear to my heart as a parent was to protect our children. I created a new crime of commercial sex abuse of a minor, and with the age of the internet and sex trafficking that is happening across our nation, this is an important crime. It is a Class A felony, when before there was no delineation for this crime, and therefore was simply charged as a misdemeanor. I also was named the vice chair of the Veterans Committee, and something I'm extremely proud of was that when Governor Malloy cut funding for the Honor Guard to veterans' funerals, I immediately fought back. And not only did I personally ensure that every veteran in the state of Connecticut received their military honors, I also made sure that we reversed that in the budget and fully funded it, because it should never be the governor's political football to take away the honor for our veterans. And with that, I hope you will allow me to continue to fight for you. I am always open and engaged, and you can call me or email me anytime, because I'm here to fight for you, and I'll continue to do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Diane Pagano?
Thank you, Wallingford Community Women. Thank you, Lauren, Gretchen, and Luther, for having us tonight. A year ago, I was on an 11-day Mediterranean cruise. And part of that cruise, you go towards the Amalfi Coast. And on the ship, you get to see this beautiful blue water. And you get to see on the mountainside the homes that are yellows and pinks and greens and blues. It's amazing. And unfortunately, the night before, I was in the disco and I twisted my knee. And we had already planned a walking tour. And I had to make a decision. Do I go on this walking tour, or do I just stay on the ship? I decided to go up the cobblestone steps, and if you've ever been to Italy or Europe, there are a lot of cobblestone steps. And I went up them, and as soon as I got to the top, I realized that sea is not just blue. It is 5 colors of blue, 5 colors of green. And then amongst the homes, there's steeples everywhere. Then you start to smell the breads and the basil, and it's an amazing experience. And I would have never had that experience had I not taken a chance, had I not gotten to the top and looked at what was down below me and around me. One of the reasons why I am running is because I want to make a difference. I made a difference in my life by just climbing up those steps in Italy. I want to make a difference in your life. I want to be able to help this economy. It's a mess, and we need different legislators, different ideas to get us through this. If you've always done what you always do, you will always get what you've always gotten. Please vote for me on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the Wallingford Community Women, I thank you for watching and remind you to please vote on November 6th.